The Goldberg variations were composed at the end of Bach's career, so around 1740, 1741. In the very first biography of Bach, written by one of his former students, it is described as a set of variations composed for a young artist who was asked to play frequently for his patron at night so his patron could sleep more easily. And this young artist was named Goldberg. Now, what's interesting is that this story only exists in this first retelling many years after Bach's death. When this piece was published, it was published in Bach's lifetime. It was not called the Goldberg Variations by Bach. And if you listen to the Goldberg Variations, I think that you'd see that this story is probably specious. It's probably not quite accurate. It sounds really great. It's great fiction. And if you heard just the aria, which is a very languid, beautiful kind of melody, you would think maybe that was something that could induce sleep. But once you get to the first variation, it's so virtuosic and powerful that you begin to see that it's not really a piece written to help anyone sleep. But in fact, it's a compendium of almost every single keyboard technique known to Bach. So the work has running passages, triplets, it's got chordal passages, rapid scale passages, trills, everything imaginable that can be done on the keyboard. But even on a higher level, it's organized as an aria with a series of variations. And every third variation is a canon. So it starts out with a canon at the unison and goes all the way up to the ninth. And these canons usually are for two voices with a third voice underneath just kind of moving through the harmony. And some of the canons are, for example, in contrary motion. So one voice might start in one direction and the second voice comes in the opposite direction. But it's a real tour de force of intellectual skill. So you can appreciate it just from a keyboard technique concept, but you can also see it as a study of an example of Bach's incredible compositional skill, because writing a single canon, even at the unison, is a task, but to write a canon, let's say at the fourth in contrary motion, and to make it sound like music is remarkable. And this is, I think, the reason why the work has developed quite a mystique over the centuries. And it's a very, very beautiful composition. Whether Bach intended it to be played in one sitting for everyone to listen to in a concert hall, unlikely. You know, it's the kind of work where probably you would play a few of the movements at a time, but never the whole thing. A little bit like the Well-Tempered Clavier, you wouldn't play all 48 preludes and fugues in one concert. That wasn't his intent. However, if you do play it as a cycle, as you play the entire piece, it does have a kind of dramatic movement throughout it, and it does work as a single piece. And so it kind of goes through all of the various moods and affections that Bach was trying to create in the audience in a very, very logical way. And it ends with some very, very dramatic variations. And finally, a repetition of the aria that started it all. And what's interesting is that the aria, although it's a variation on the aria, it's actually a variation on a chord pattern. So the aria itself is a variation of a chord pattern. So it's kind of like a passacaglia, what's called a passacaglia, which is a series of chords. And then the aria is layered onto it. And then every variation follows exactly the same harmonic pattern. So when you listen to it, it's difficult to believe that these variations are so closely related, but when you study them harmonically, you see, my goodness, it's the same set of chords that were in the aria. So it's one of the most fascinating pieces of Johann Sebastian Bach's. It's a real honor to play it, and I've been working on it for over a year now. I'd not played it before in public, and I'm looking forward to it. It's very exciting. I think that when I have as I've worked on this piece, I've often had to do a lot of traveling. As dean, I visit a lot of cities and talk to alumni groups and do fundraising in other cities. And when I'm on the plane, I will get out the score and frequently listen to other artists' performances of them, and sometimes just look at the score myself. And so you're constantly working primarily on interpretation, because the challenge of a work of that size is that it's also a study in the variation of approaches of interpretation. So one movement is a kind of a beautiful melodic aria, and the next movement is almost like an etude of some kind, and then the next movement is a very, very intricate fugue, and every one of those has a special personality. And trying to find the right interpretation as you go through this entire spectrum of human emotion is one of the challenges. And that's something that really is best done away from the music, because when you're caught up in playing it, you don't often think of it this way. But when you're sitting there listening to it or going through it mentally, you begin to see, you know, what are the important emotions and moods that are being covered in the course of this piece. Well, there are arrangements of the Goldberg variations for other ensembles. There's a string arrangement that I've heard that's quite beautiful. Many of Bach's works for keyboard can be transcribed for other groupings. This is because the music is so fundamentally beautiful in sound, so that you could take a fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier and play it on 3 saxophones, and it would sound wonderful. Seriously, I mean, I've heard that done. You can take a prelude from the little preludes of Anna Magdalena Bach and play it on a xylophone, and it's gorgeous. So Bach's music is so beautiful, and it's not limited just to the instrument that it was originally written for. So I saw some of Colonel Bourgeois' arrangements even last summer. He was showing me what he'd already worked on, because he's been working on this project for years, evidently. And it looked delightful. It reminded me a lot of, there's a wonderful arrangement for instruments of Bach's Art of Fugue by a musicologist named Wolfgang Grätzer, who was one of the first editors of the new Bach edition back in the 1920s and 30s. And Grätzer wrote an edition of the Art of Fugue for various chamber groups, so string quartet, woodwind quintet, all kinds of variety in that piece, and it works beautifully. The Art of Fugue is theoretically written for organ. It can be played on the harpsichord, but it's wonderful when it's played by other instruments. The Goldberg variations, because it is so oriented towards keyboard virtuosity, it'll be very interesting to hear the wind ensemble version, because it will involve a lot of virtuosic playing. Of course, we're lucky that we have one of the best wind ensembles in America with the Loyola Wind Ensemble, plus we'll be augmenting it with a few of our faculty members as well. So I anticipate that to be something really, really gorgeous, and something Bach would have loved. I'm sure he'd be thrilled to hear that.